Hey everyone, my name is Ben Chaish, and today I'm going to do a quick video talking about my first impressions of owning the Sony FX3. Now, I was going to do a much more in-depth video about this camera, and I probably still will, but you have to back burner so many things and all the editing and whatnot that goes into making like an in-depth thing. Was sort of daunting, and then I saw my friend Eric Floberg post just like a talking, just walk around kind of video, talking about his experience with the C70 from Canon, and so I thought, hey, that's a sweet idea. Let's just do like a simple little video here talking about my first impressions, mostly about the reasons that I kind of got into one and the general user experience, and then another time we can jump more in depth into the things that matter and the details about all of it. But that being said, I think that the usability and how something works is a significant thing in a review, and that is definitely what I can jump into today and talk about my experience and what I love and maybe don't love about this camera. Now, full disclosure, I do have contacts at Sony, and obviously they've been letting me borrow things for the last few months, but this is a full setup that I purchased with my own money. They did not give me anything in this setup other than the fact that I was able to borrow an FX3, borrow an Alpha 1, borrow an A7 IV, borrow an A7R4. And so I've just been able to kind of pick and choose through that system to see what I really liked and compare it to my current setup, which made it really, really easy to know which thing I wanted. So first things first, this is a dedicated video camera. It technically says it's part of Sony's cinema line. It's the same basics internals as the Sony a7S III, cinema, whatever. That being said, it is in a different body and just a different kind of a rig overall. And even just the fact that it doesn't have an EVF or an OVF, I guess for that matter, makes it so, for me at least, my brain can compartmentalize things much easier when they are easily separated. So I'm filming this video on my Sony a7 IV, which I also just purchased. See a trend here. And what I like about that camera is the fact that it's like a fantastic hybrid camera. Like the image that's coming out of this right now at 4K, 24 frames a second is maybe even better than this, just depending on what your preferences are. But that camera is a camera that I just pulled out of my bag because I used it at a wedding over the weekend. And I just like the idea of having something that is a dedicated piece for a specific type of thing. It does all of the things I want. I don't have to do a bunch of things to it to make it do other things. I don't have to switch things back and forth. So I love that it is just a dedicated video camera in that way. I know a lot of people don't necessarily like it, but this top handle is something that I really enjoy. When I go out and actually just go to film something, I like having a handle. I've used a top handle on my Canon R6 for quite a while to do a lot of B-roll things. I can run XLR into here. I have this little microphone as like sort of scratch audio, I guess, and like a backup in case. But then I just run the normal overhead mic just directly into here. And then I have, this as well. It has 4 channels of audio, so you're able to do, a lot more with it. I'm actually recording this with the Rode Wireless Go 2 and the Lavalier Go as well. The nice thing about that as well is I have a few places on this handle and on this cage, for that matter as well, that I can put both the Wireless Go and the Rode Video Mic NTG on here, so I can have like a shotgun mic on here and use that audio when I'm close to the camera. But then if I'm walking far away or whatever, I can also use the wireless audio and then just kind of choose between those. I also just really love the feel of this camera. I clearly, have a bunch of kind of inspiring cameras that I like to take out and I like to use, and this camera is definitely on that list. It's not necessarily, 20 times better or anything than like the Sony a7 IV or something, but there is just something about it that just feels a little bit different. Like I like the grip a lot more. I like the button placement. When I'm doing video stuff, like I just love having all of these little video-centric buttons and placements. And the way that my hand goes up here, having the record button on the top just makes a ton of sense to me. Basically just how the whole camera is both laid out and how it feels have been great, and something that I definitely love from an ergonomic standpoint, because again, when I'm using this camera, I am not thinking about photography, and I'm using a camera that was built to do video stuff, not do photography. So there's not really any compromises in that way in terms of just the overall ergonomics of a small camera like this. Now, the other thing is that while I don't think that it's probably going to be an issue at all, this has the internal fan here, and I don't think I'll ever run into it, but most of my other cameras, actually all of my other cameras up to this point, have had an overheating issue at one point or another. I filmed a bunch with the XE4, and that thing would shut off after 20 minutes. The R6, when filming just in 24 frames a second in 4K, that never overheated on me at all. It was just when I was using 4K 60, that would overheat after a while, and so just knowing that this is not gonna overheat, I'm gonna be totally fine. Then yeah, simple things, just like the fact that this has these little doors here instead of the flaps. I hate the flaps on Canon cameras, but these little doors are really nice because it looks nice and flush when you don't have it open, and then it just isn't like in the way. Also, clearly a full-size HDMI port. Jumping back to the top handle as well, I think the top handle makes no sense how it currently is, but then when you add either the small rig or the Condor Blue handle, it makes it make sense. Like, my pinky goes into the spot where my pinky should be, and like, I don't have to worry about all that stuff kind of falling over. And then my palm can kind of rest on the edge here, where otherwise that just wasn't the case. I also added this little hot shoe where I can mount a monitor. Usually I have like an Atomos on there that I can either use for recording or just simply as a monitor. Because one of the things that I really don't like about this camera, and was kind of disappointed, and by kind of I mean pretty disappointed, was this little rear LCD screen. It's the only thing on the camera to just monitor anything with. It feels like a high-end camera in every other way. The build quality, everything feels high-end and really nice. And then just the screen on here is just kind of meh. And while I think this is the same flip-out screen as the A7S III as well, it just would have been nice to have that be part of the upgrade, because it's the only way to monitor things going on the camera. Another thing that it was really huge for me is I think that something that makes an image look much more cinematic is just the overall dynamic range in an image. I can mess with color and sharpness and all those things, but I can't add dynamic range to an image if I don't already have the dynamic range there. And the S-Log3 curve here just pulls in so much more dynamic range than the C-Log3 curve that I had on the R6. So just instantly I found that everything coming out of this camera just works better for the image that I'm looking for in that way. I also do love the 4K 120. I try to just make these videos as fast as I can and have a good fast workflow. I don't mean to skimp on things, but I like to do things quickly so I can get more of this stuff out. And I also run a photography business, so I can't just, I'm not a full-time YouTuber. So adding the 4K 120, doing all the B-roll in 120 instead of at 60 means that I have twice as much footage that I can use. And that just means that I don't have to spend as much time shooting B-roll. It also, because it's faster, those little jiggles or whatever show up less. So it's just another one of those things that helps my workflow and ended up being a really, really nice thing for me in that way. The other thing that I love is, minus a monitor, which I've used before, this is about as rigged out as it gets for me, which is still big enough that it does all the things I need, but small enough that it's not like enormous and a pain to carry around. I can easily walk around with this to the park with my kids and whatever, and it's not just like a massive burden, although it clearly isn't the smallest thing in the world. That being said, if you take off the cage and you take off the top handle, this camera is really small. Honestly, it's just one of those things where just tossing it with a neck strap and I can take it to a park or whatever, and I've often even just not even used the, shotgun mic from Rode. I've just used the little wireless packs. Having a very small camera setup is something that's super important to me. So that's all the rigging I've got. It's literally just this little setup here. And then while I do have to slip over another one of those Peak Design things to put it on another camera strap, this is a very small video setup with a 28 to 70 f2.8 full frame lens. It can do just a ton of stuff, and I just love how small this little package is. Like, having the ability to use such a small little setup makes things so much easier for me. And mainly because I'm doing this where I'm not necessarily going out and just filming. I'm going out and filming something about photography typically, so I'm using another camera when I go out and do something kind of minimal like this. So being able to bring a small camera, it's just like bringing 2 normal size cameras instead of, you know, having some big rig or setup or whatever. I just find that this little zoom lens is really a cool little thing. And speaking of lenses, frankly, the Sony ecosystem is just so far ahead of where Canon is. Just the availability of all these different lenses, many of which are on their second or even sometimes third, I believe, generations of that kind of focal range. And just the fact that you have so many options available to you was something that made it pretty easy for me to check out. The last thing on here being that I talk about adapting lenses on this channel quite a bit. And for whatever reason, the Sony mount and sensor and the distances or whatever's going on there ends up being able to mount the lenses that I have, especially all of my Leica M mount glass, onto here with no problems. All the times that I used to adapt them onto my R6, anything 50mm or under would give that kind of purple haze, whatever stuff on it, and it looked really bad. And I basically only used the Canon on, you know, like 75 and 90mm lenses when I was adapting them onto that platform. But I used all the way down to like that 15mm Zeiss lens on here, and it looked fantastic. So it's just another one of those things where it like opened up my ecosystem of lenses from even all these inexpensive Sony E-mount lenses, but also all of my Leica lenses look fantastic on this camera, which, you know, adds another dimension of things that I'm able to do with it, which I wasn't able to do on my previous setup. So thanks so much for watching. I'll do another in-depth video on this where I talk more about, you know, the specs and the high ISO and all of the ergonomics and things like that. But I think that if you're someone that's considering an FX3 or just want to know more about it, obviously there's a ton of videos on the specs, but I don't see a lot of people talking about just the real world use. So I definitely want to put that out there because it's a camera that has brought me a ton of joy. And I think, if I'm being honest, Sony has kind of the stereotype of being more of like the meticulous computer kind of camera that's not inspiring. I know that that's something I've claimed in the past, but I will say that this camera, especially for me, the FX3, is 100% in that category of cameras that are inspiring to pick up and ergonomically great. It even looks good in my opinion. So it's definitely a huge step forward for me, and honestly the thing that made me kind of switch over to the Sony system. If you have any questions about all this stuff, feel free to leave it below and I'll try to answer it either in the comments or in a future video. Subscribe if you aren't already, and I will see you all on the next one.